The crowd erupted the instant Dolly Parton finished her final soaring note, a roar that shook the chandeliers of the Grand Ole Opry on a frost-bitten February night in 1990. Behind the crimson velvet curtain, Porter Wagoner stood motionless in his powder-blue rhinestone suit, thousands of sequins scattering light like broken mirror shards. For 23 years he had been the monarch of that stage, the kingmaker who discovered Dolly, taught her how to work a television camera, coached her phrasing, and polished her country girl glow until it blinded. Now, as she received a thunderous solo ovation, he realized the student had eclipsed the teacher, and something inside him cracked with an audible silence only he could hear. The hiss from the monitor speakers felt to Porter like cicadas in August cornfields, an endlessly buzzing reminder that time was moving forward without his permission. Longtime steel guitarist Don Warden tried to ease the tension with a joke about dropped steel picks, but Porter barely heard him. Instead, he replayed an older memory. The afternoon in 1974 when Dolly had walked into his office, wearing a pastel dress and carrying a single cassette. He had pressed play expecting another clever mountain ballad, and instead heard a farewell letter wrapped in 3 simple chords. That song, "I Will Always Love You," had made him cry once. Tonight, 16 years later, its prophecy towered over him. Dolly basked in spotlight while he trembled in shadow, his right hand shaking as he adjusted the rhinestone cuff. Long before the glitter, there was a hungry boy named Porter Wagoner, growing up on a subsistence farm outside West Plains, Missouri. Born in 1927, he spent childhood hoeing rocky soil, milking cows at dawn, and sharing cornbread suppers that never quite erased hunger. The family radio, powered by a car battery that drained faster than they could afford to recharge, offered a weekly lifeline. Saturday night Grand Ole Opry broadcasts beaming Hank Williams and Mother Maybelle Carter across the darkness. Music became an escape hatch from dust-gray poverty. When classmates trudged home, Porter stayed behind in the one-room schoolhouse to soak in the piano's tinny chords, believing the sound itself promised freedom. By 17, he was hustling cuts of meat at a Springfield butcher shop, singing old hymns in a clear tenor to customers who lingered in the frozen aisle just to hear him finish a verse. His voice reached the ear of KWTO radio talent scout C. Seaman, who booked the lanky teenager for a morning show. Porter's on-air persona, earnest, humble, sprinkled with Ozark humor, won listeners, and within a year he was fronting the Blue Ridge Boys, learning microphone technique and the merciless punctuality of live broadcasting. RCA Victor signed him in 1952. 3 years later, his single, "A Satisfied Mind," hit #1 on the Billboard country chart, buying his parents a new roof and himself a ticket to Nashville. Success demanded spectacle. Inspired by Hollywood westerns, Porter ordered a mustard yellow suit from rodeo tailor's master Nudie Cone. The jacket arrived covered in stitched wagon wheels and wagon tongues of silver sequins. Critics scoffed, but audiences gasped. Porter realized instantly that visual drama could yank rural music onto every living room television. He embraced color like a preacher embraces revival, commissioning coats in turquoise, crimson, lime, each piece costing more than the pickup trucks parked outside the Opry. The suits became armor against insecurity and a lighthouse for viewers flipping channels. In 1960, he parlayed that flash into the Porter Wagoner Show, a syndicated half-hour bursting with gospel quartets, corny skits, and razor-tight performances. Ratings skyrocketed. At its zenith, the program reached 3.5 million viewers each Saturday, introducing rural twang to apartments as far away as Portland and Providence. Advertisers lined up to sling flour, coffee, and kitchen appliances between songs. Porter rehearsed relentlessly, drilling his band until they could hit harmonies in their sleep. He was boss, cheerleader, and perfectionist, and no one doubted who signed the checks. Dolly Parton's first taping in 1967 felt like derailment on live TV. Viewers flooded stations with letters demanding the return of Norma Jean, the beloved singer Dolly had replaced. Porter ignored the fury. He heard something mystic in Dolly's mountain soprano, equal parts vulnerability and iron. He doubled her solos, championed her songwriting, and paired their voices in duets that sprinted up the charts. The Last Thing on My Mind, Just Someone I Used to Know, and the 1974 chart topper, Please Don't Stop Loving Me. The duo's chemistry turned the show into appointment television and transformed Dolly from unknown East Tennessee dreamer into a star in under 3 years. Life on the road with Dolly felt like hauling lightning in a mason jar. On the tour bus, she cracked jokes about hairspray igniting the air vents, while Porter fussed over rehearsal keys. They wrote songs between truck stop coffee refills, Dolly scribbling lyrics on hamburger wrappers, Porter humming bass lines. The energy produced gold records, but also friction. Porter admired order. Dolly thrived in creative chaos. When a reporter asked Dolly in 1971 whether Porter was her father figure, she laughed, "Daddy never told me what dress to wear." The quote landed on front pages and bruised Porter's ego. By late 1973, Dolly wanted out. Years of success had sharpened her ambition to cross into pop, while Porter clung to traditional country. Knowing a direct confrontation would end in fireworks, she wrote her goodbye in song, 4 verses of tender gratitude called "I Will Always Love You." When she performed it privately, Porter wept, then insisted on producing the single. It soared to #1. The emotional truce evaporated quickly as Dolly's solo album Jolene stormed the charts. Photographers followed her everywhere. Porter felt the orbit shift painfully away from him. 5 restless years hardened grief into anger. On March 21, 1979, Porter filed a Chancery Court lawsuit seeking $3 million from Dolly for breach of contract and unpaid royalties. He claimed verbal promises and argued that mentoring her made him entitled to future percentages. Nashville gasped. Veterans sympathized. Younger executives cringed. Dolly, stunned yet poised, called the suit the deepest cut and prepared to fight. Depositions dragged for months until Dolly offered an out-of-court settlement reportedly near $1 million, money she borrowed against her own songwriting catalog to avoid a public brawl. The payout did not save Porter. Losing Dolly's drawing power sank the Porter Wagoner Show, canceled in 1981. Record sales plummeted. Yet Porter, addicted to flash, kept ordering Rhinestone masterpieces, buying Cadillacs, and investing in a themed restaurant chain that folded within a year. He borrowed against future royalties from his publishing company, Opry, certain a comeback record would rescue him. Country radio, now hooked on urban cowboy sheen and outlaw grit, ignored his new singles. Creditors circled. By 1984, he owed back taxes, staff payroll, and bank loans collateralized with his song catalog. Auction posters listed 27 hand-tooled nudie garments. Porter attended the sale hidden under a floppy hat, leaving before the hammer dropped on his favorite red suit. In 1988, he filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, listing liabilities over $2 million against assets barely reaching $500,000. The filing shocked fans who had assumed television royalty equaled wealth. Porter downsized from his bucolic estate to a modest ranch house, sold classic cars, and pawned guitar collections. Humiliation gnawed, and the once confident host recoiled from public life, appearing at the Opry only sporadically. Financial implosion mutated into mental despair. Early in 1992, his daughter Deborah discovered him accusing relatives of poisoning his food. He barricaded doors, refused sleep for nights, and scribbled paranoid lyrics no band could interpret. Doctors diagnosed manic depression, today's bipolar disorder, and admitted him to Centennial Medical Center's psychiatric ward. Electroconvulsive therapy quieted voices but left him hollow. Friends visited and left weeping. The king of Rhinestones now shuffled hallways in hospital scrubs, greeting imaginary cameras. One person never wavered. Dolly, hearing whispers of Porter's condition, tracked down his number and called. He sobbed when he recognized her voice. She visited often, bringing yellow roses, his mother's favorite. They swapped stories, Porter apologizing for the lawsuit, Dolly answering with jokes until laughter replaced guilt. Quietly, she purchased 200 of his early masters and returned rights so future royalties flowed directly to him, a stealth lifeline that settled debts without bruising pride. Producer Marty Stewart convinced Porter back into the studio, cutting Wagon Master, a raw, reflective album released in June 2007 on Jack White's indie label. Critics raved. Rolling Stone awarded 4 stars. Jack invited Porter to open for the White Stripes at Madison Square Garden, and hipsters in flannel cheered an 80-year-old legend as if he were a punk pioneer. Backstage, Porter told Dolly, "I finally feel cool again." And she replied, "You were always cool. You just forgot for a little while." Lung cancer treatments began failing that autumn. Dolly cleared her schedule, learned to adjust oxygen lines, and sang old duets at his bedside. One evening, she set her Grammy for 9 to 5 on the nightstand and teased, "Guard this while I go sign autographs." Porter's raspy laugh filled the room. On October 28, 2007, he slipped away surrounded by family and Dolly singing a soft hymn. At his Opry House funeral, she delivered a trembling eulogy, then performed, "I Will Always Love You," the song that had once marked their farewell. Now, a benediction. Porter's estate at death totaled less than $500,000, yet his cultural balance sheet brimmed with riches. The rhinestone suits he sold now fetch 6-figure bids at auctions. His TV catalog streams to new fans who marvel at fearless jackets and tight arrangements. Music historians credit his concept albums with pushing country storytelling toward cinematic breadth. Most poignant of all, the song Born of Goodbye has generated tens of millions in royalties, its earnings dwarfing the $3 million Porter once claimed he deserved. Dolly often notes that Porter's insistence on producing the original recording secured his name forever in the credits, a footnote he carried like a medal. Mental health advocates cite Porter's story when campaigning for resources in rural Tennessee, arguing that hospitalization saved his life as surely as penicillin cures infection. Deborah Wagoner funds therapy programs for aging musicians unprepared for silence once spotlights dim. She tells young artists, "Daddy thought applause was medicine, but real healing happens when the house lights go up and you're alone with yourself." Even now, late-night truckers tap steering wheels to Porter's cover of Green, Green Grass of Home, unaware the soothing voice once shattered under the weight of its own success. In the Country Music Hall of Fame, a powder blue suit glitters in a glass case, sequins catching phone camera flashes. A plaque reads, "Talent discovers talent. Pride discovers downfall. Love discovers redemption." Visitors linger, tracing reflections on the glass, recognizing that shine and shatter come from the same cut crystal. Porter's television genius lay not only in booking top musicians, but in understanding pacing. He structured each episode like a miniature carnival. Up-tempo opener, wholesome comedy routine, solemn gospel duet, sponsor jingle, then a climactic ballad bathed in amber light. This rhythm kept rural grandmothers, restless toddlers, and big city channel surfers equally glued. Studio tapings at WLAC-TV became tourist attractions. Families drove hundreds of miles to watch Porter rehearse transitions with a stopwatch around his neck. He demanded smiles even during dress rehearsal, arguing that cameras could sense insincerity. Crew members later recalled that those half-hour slots felt longer than Broadway musicals because perfection had no time limit. Money poured in. By 1968, Porter earned more annually than many network news anchors, yet he funneled profits back into production. He upgraded lighting rigs so sequins would sparkle like fireworks on black and white sets, paid hazardous duty bonuses to camera operators who worked under scorching arcs, and mailed promotional photos to every country disc jockey in America. The resulting feedback loop pushed record sales higher, which financed even bolder stagecraft, laser-cut show logos, a portable wagon wheel set, and once briefly, live doves released during an Easter hymn. Porter was both ringmaster and biggest attraction, a balancing act that thrilled audiences but slowly convinced him the circus could not spin without him at the center. That belief cracked the day Dolly announced her solo ambitions. Porter's initial anger masked fear. Fear that syndicators cared more about a blonde ingenue than the man whose name topped the marquee. Fear that Nashville's new executives prized crossover pop sheen over old-school twang. Fear that age was creeping into his stage stride. In private, he complained to friends that modern fans wanted slick-over soul. In public, he championed traditionalism, framing Dolly's crossover desire as betrayal. The tension sold tabloids but poisoned rehearsals. Bandmates described practicing harmonies while two titans avoided eye contact, their smiles tighter than guitar strings tuned a half-step too high. When the lawsuit became public, Nashville's Music Row rumbled like an earthquake. Lawyers dissected handshake deals common in the 1960s, discovering gray zones where mentorship, management, and friendship overlapped. Veteran song pluggers whispered that Porter was right to demand compensation for launching Dolly, while rising female artists whispered that women owed no perpetual debt to male gatekeepers. Radio talk shows fielded calls day and night. The debate, though cloaked in legalese, foreshadowed conversations decades later about artistic ownership and power imbalances, proving that Rhinestone history often carries threads of modern relevance. Porter's bankruptcy hearings laid bare the fragility behind television glamour. Court transcripts itemized debts down to unpaid dry cleaning bills for suits that no longer fit shrinking shoulders. Reporters scribbled headlines like "Rhinestones in the Red," while Porter sat stone-faced, flanked by attorneys he could barely afford. Outside the courthouse, fans left bouquets of plastic flowers on his Cadillac windshield, a humble gesture in a city that can smell failure. Porter later said those daisies meant more than any gold record because they reminded him somebody still believed when he nearly didn't. Hospitalization forced a different kind of spotlight. Inside Centennial's ward, Porter attended music therapy sessions where patients shook tambourines and sang "This Little Light of Mine." At first he refused, embarrassed by off-key voices and fluorescent lights instead of footlights. A nurse suggested he teach a class on songwriting structure. Slowly, his competitive spirit re-engaged. He spent afternoons explaining verse-chorus form to veterans battling schizophrenia, delighted when a room with no cameras still applauded. Those scattered claps, he later wrote in a journal, were small but honest, and maybe honesty is the rarest kind of applause. Dolly's quiet financial rescue extended further than song copyrights. She arranged for Porter's medical bills to be negotiated down, enlisted her business manager to untangle royalty streams, and sent a wardrobe consultant to track down two of his most famous nudie suits for museum safekeeping. She told interviewers only that "we look after our own," refusing to turn charity into publicity. Insiders knew better. The gesture saved Porter's dignity, allowing him to accept help without feeling like a charity case. In return, he penned her a handwritten letter of thanks so poetic that Dolly framed it beside her first gold record. The Madison Square Garden appearance proved cathartic. Watching 30-year-old indie rock fans mosh to classic country shattered Porter's fear that tradition and progress were mortal enemies. He performed "A Satisfied Mind with Renewed Conviction," a song about spiritual wealth that suddenly applied to him personally. Critics called the set borderline surreal, a collision of white stripes and rhinestone stripes. But none denied the electricity. When another date was offered, Porter declined, his health already faltering. But he told friends the sound of that Manhattan crowd would echo longer than any Opry encore. Porter's funeral drew such a crowd that traffic on Interstate 65 backed up for miles. Black limousines idled beside pickup trucks decorated with homemade signs reading, "Thanks, Porter." Inside the Opry House, performers spread like a living timeline of country music. From little Jimmy Dickens in a glittering jacket to newcomers clutching guitars they hoped to christen on that sacred wood. When Dolly stepped to the microphone, silence rolled through the pews. Her rendition of "I Will Always Love You" began as a whisper, swelled into heartbreak, and ended with a hush, so deep camera shutters paused, grief mingled with gratitude. If Porter could whisper advice from beyond, perhaps he'd repeat a line he scribbled on a hospital notepad. When your song ends, Don't fight the silence. Listen to what it's telling you. For a man who spent half a century coaxing silence to respond with applause, learning to listen was the hardest encore. His journey from barefoot farm boy to rhinestone monarch, from lawsuit villain to humbled elder, proves that losing everything can clear space for what truly matters. Forgiveness turned enemies into family, humility transformed bankruptcy into wisdom, art outlived ego. Legends never truly fade.